Hello, you're watching All 24 News live from Algiers. Coming up next are your headlines. President Joe Biden has delivered an impassioned speech to Congress to act on gun control. Ukraine's president says 20% of his country is under Russian control but vows to continue defending Ukraine. El Salvador's security forces have arrested more than 36,000 people since Congress granted President Nayib Bukele the power to suspend some civil liberties to pursue powerful street gangs. And finally, you'll be watching in our news, Queen Elizabeth will miss the national service of Thanksgiving at St. Paul's Cathedral in London today after experiencing some discomfort following her brief appearance on the Buckingham Palace balcony on Thursday. Hello again, those were today's top stories. Fast in our news, President Joe Biden has delivered an impassioned speech to Congress to act on gun control. In an address to the nation Thursday night, he called on lawmakers to restore limits on the sale of assault-style weapons and high-capacity magazines after a string of mass shootings in the country. Hassan Burkan with more details.
President Joe Biden made a national address following a wave of mass shootings in recent weeks. Joe Biden blasted the unacceptable refusal of the majority of Republican senators to tighten gun regulations in the United States during a televised address nearly 10 days after the massacre at the elementary school in Uvalde.
My God, the fact that the majority of the Senate Republicans don't want any of these proposals even to be debated or come up for a vote, I find unconscionable.
Biden called also on banning the sale of assault rifles and high-capacity magazines to individuals, which caused 3 appalling massacres in less than 2 months.
We need to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And if we can't ban assault weapons, then we should raise the age to purchase them from 18 to 21. Strengthen background checks, enact safe storage law and red flag laws. Repeal the immunity that protects gun manufacturers from liability. Address the mental health crisis, deepening the trauma.
Holding 3 guns from his private arsenal during the House Judiciary Committee hearing on gun control, Republican Greg Stew responded to Biden's call to tighten gun regulations, arguing that the bill proposed is intended to prevent them from defending their families and their kids.
Here's a gun I carry every single day to protect myself, my family, my wife, my home. This is a XL 6-hour P365. Comes with a 15-round magazine. Here's a 7-round magazine, which would be less than what would be lawful under this bill if this bill were to become law. It doesn't fit. So this gun would be banned.
The address follows a shooting that killed 19 students, 2 teachers at an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas, and another attack on June 1st in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where a gunman shot and killed 4 people and himself at a medical office. Those 2 shootings came after the May 14 assaults in Buffalo, New York, that killed 10 people and wounding 3 others in what authorities described as racially motivated violent extremism.
What do we do?
And in a related context, U.S. President Joe Biden called on Congress to ban assault weapons, expand background checks, and implement other gun control measures to address a string of mass shootings that have struck the United States, declaring enough is enough. And the National Rifle Association gun lobby said in a statement that Biden's proposals would infringe on the rights of law-abiding gun owners and that it is not a real solution. Still with the United States, U.S. President Joe Biden is expected to visit Saudi Arabia this month as his administration aims to find ways to bring more oil into the global market and to repair relations with Riyadh. After Biden took office, his administration has sought to smooth over tensions with Saudi Arabia, which represents a key player in several top foreign policy issues confronting the United States. The United Nations said Thursday that Yemen's warring parties have agreed to renew a nationwide truce for another 2 months. The announcement is a glimmer of hope for the country plagued by 8 years of civil war, though significant obstacles remain to lasting peace. The ceasefire between Yemen's internationally recognized government and the Iran-backed Houthi rebels first came into effect on April 2nd, the first nationwide truce in the past 6 years of the conflict in the Arab world's most impoverished nation. Today marks the first 100 days of conflict in Ukraine. While the situation around the capital seems to be calmer, frightening shelling in the Donbass still takes place. Ukraine's president says 20% of his country is under Russian control, but vows to continue defending Ukraine, while Russia says it will continue its military operation in Ukraine until all its goals have been achieved. Nabil Khazini with more insights.
Exactly 100 days ago, a raid siren sounded in this place in Ukraine's capital Kiev, marking a beginning of a conflict and a turning point in the history of the world. 100 days ago, Ukraine's president addressed the nation the morning Russia started its military operation in Ukraine. Today, with the same spirit, he made another address. We have been defending Ukraine for 100 days, says Mr. Zelensky, but now 20% of Ukraine's land has been lost for the Russians.
About 20% of our territory is under the control of the occupiers, nearly 125,000 kilometers square. This is much more than the territory of all the Benelux countries. Nearly 12 million Ukrainians became internally displaced. More than 5 million, mostly women and children, moved abroad.
While Kiev seems to be calmer, the situation in the east of the country is totally different. As Russia tightened its grip on the area in the battle for control of Ukraine's eastern Donbass region, heavily damaged buildings and explosions are often heard in the distance there, a sign that the war hasn't reached an end in the east and probably will not, as Moscow vows it will continue fighting in Ukraine until all goals are achieved.
One of the main goals of the operation is to protect people in the DNR and LNR. Measures have been taken to ensure their protection, and certain results have been achieved.
Russian troops continue their military operation in the east of Ukraine. If Russia fully captures Severodonetsk, it would hold all of Luhansk, one of 2 provinces with Donetsk claimed by the Russian-backed separatists.
The White House on Thursday announced a bevy of new sanctions on Russia as the brutal invasion of Ukraine stretches into its 4th month. The Treasury and State Departments announced on a number of new measures, including targeting Russian government officials, oligarchs, and elites close to Vladimir Putin, according to a press release from the White House. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin praised NATO leadership as he received Alliance Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg at the Pentagon. Jens Stoltenberg affirmed that NATO must prevent the Russian special operation in Ukraine from turning into an open war between Russia and NATO.
I especially want to thank you for your firm and principled leadership of this indispensable alliance during this historic time. In the face of Russia's unprovoked aggression against Ukraine, NATO has grown stronger and more united.
NATO's responsibility is to help and support Ukraine in upholding the right for self-defense. At the same time, NATO also has a responsibility to prevent this war from escalating, to become a full-fledged war between Russia and NATO. Most wars, and also most likely this war, will at some stage end at the negotiating table. But what we know is that what happens around the negotiating table is very closely linked to the situation on the ground, on the battlefield. So we need to help them, to support them, so they can achieve the best possible outcome of this conflict.
Swedish Finance Minister Mikael Damberg announced that Sweden will have additional aid to Ukraine of 95 million euros, including financial and military support.
In total, the proposed budget change reached 1 billion crowns. These resources can strengthen Ukraine's defense capabilities in a very serious situation. We see that there is still great suffering for the Ukrainian people. Supporting Ukraine is both a matter of solidarity, but it is also important for Sweden's security.
On Thursday, President Volodymyr Zelensky urged the West to increase armament shipments to Ukraine in order to help Kiev reach an inflection point in its long-running conflict with Russia. The Ukrainian president said that Europe's differences provided possibilities for Russia to exploit and that Kiev was thankful for the West's help thus far.
We are grateful for the help we are getting. To every man and woman that helps us. But weapons supplies need to be stepped up, because it's in the battlefield of Ukraine that the freedom of Europe and all its nations, with no expectations, will be determined.
In a game of diplomatic cat and mouse, Russia and the West are coming up with similar, if sometimes competing ideas for how Ukraine's badly needed grain can be given safe passage through the Black Sea and on to the world markets. Turkey, as the second strongest power in the NATO members, is playing an important role in guaranteeing security for the grain exports from the Ukrainian ports, as Turkey owns a long shore with the Black Sea. On Friday, oil prices clung to gains in the previous session with doubts about OPEC Plus' abilities to compensate for the scarcity of Russian supplies. Sofian Kanturi with more details.
Crude prices remained constant, with global benchmark Brent crude futures ending at $117 per barrel, and U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures up 1 cent to $116 per barrel. According to official statistics, U.S. crude stocks decreased faster than predicted in a week, and in May 27, while gasoline stocks fell short of forecasts. The OPEC Plus alliance has accelerated its plans to restore oil production to levels seen before the emergence of the coronavirus epidemic, dispersing a predicted increase of 432,000 barrels per day between July and August. In a surprising move that surprised analyst expectations, the alliance authorized a 50% increase in oil deliveries beyond prior monthly rises of 432,000 barrels per day, giving Russia 170,000 barrels per day gain. The increase in production came mostly from Iraq with 71,000 barrels and the United Arab Emirates by 52,000 barrels, with Saudi Arabia and Russia maintaining their levels of increase in output. Algeria's Minister of Energy and Mines, Mohamed Arqab, has stated that Algeria's output share under the OPEC Plus agreement will be increased by 70,000 barrels per day in July. During his participation in the meeting of Technical Ministerial Committee of the Alliance OPEC Plus via Visual Civilization Technology, Mohamed Arqab confirmed that the new increase would enable Algeria to raise its total output to 1,039,000 barrels.
Stockholm 50 Plus, the international meeting convened by the United Nations General Assembly, is aiming to adopt a series of principles on the environment for a healthy planet and the prosperity of all. Briam Zien with more details.
The international meeting Stockholm Plus 50 will commemorate the 50 years since 1972 UN Conference on the Human Environment. 5 decades after the first Stockholm meeting, the world faces a triple planetary crisis of climate change, pollution and waste, as well as other planetary problems that are affecting current and future prosperity and well-being.
Today, I urge countries to embrace the human right to a clean, healthy environment for all people everywhere, especially poor communities, women and girls, indigenous peoples, young people, and the generations to come. To rescue the global environment and humanity's future, we must transform the accounting systems that reward pollution and waste.
Kenya's president, who is co-hosting the meeting with Sweden, emphasized that Africa is suffering from the impact of climate change and expressed his worries.
I take this opportunity to remind us all that Africa, despite its relatively limited global emission footprint, is suffering disproportionately from the impact of climate change. We urge all our partners across the globe today to honor their commitments to double global climate finance.
The Swedish Prime Minister, for her part, said it is now time to move.
So the purpose of this meeting today is that we go home from here and do much more and do it much faster.
The event acts as a facilitator to accelerate the implementation of the UN Decade of Action to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals, including the 2030 Agenda, Paris Agreement on Climate Change, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and encourage the adoption of green post-COVID-19 recovery plans.
Over the past 10 weeks, El Salvador's security forces have arrested more than 36,000 people since Congress granted President Nayib Bukele the power to suspend some civil liberties to pursue powerful street gangs, that is. This puts Salvador domestic security in better state as the government has decreed to further expand its crackdown against gang violence. However, fears of arbitrary suspension is rising in the country. Usama Ayadi with more.
El Salvador's Congress granted a request Wednesday by President Nayib Bukele to extend the country's anti-gang emergency decree for a second time. The vote extends for an additional 30 days of the initial one-month-long state of emergency issued in late March and extended in April for another month.
8 of every 10 Salvadorians approved of the state of emergency. And we can say 8 of every 10 Salvadorians has perceived the improvement of security in their communities from the insecurity provoked by the gangs, by those terrorist groups.
The current extension measure was approved with 67 votes in the 84-seat Congress, where Bukele's party holds a majority. Bukele has used emergency powers to round up about 35,500 suspected gang members following a spate of killings in March, which is considered a step forward for El Salvador's government to win its war against the widespread violence caused by gangs. Rights groups have criticized the measures, saying arrests are often arbitrary based on a person's appearance or where they live. Polls suggest the emergency decree has strong support among Salvadorans. The measure came after a spate of homicides in late March, when gangs were blamed for 62 killings in a single weekend, a level of violence the country of 6.5 million people had not seen in years.
It's a cancer that won't be eradicated with 2 chemotherapy treatments. We need more time to continue eradicating this cancer from all of our country's communities.
The gang's power is strongest in El Salvador's poorest neighborhoods, where the state has long been absent. They are a drain on the economy, extorting money from even the lowest earners and forcing businesses that can or won't pay to close. Gangs have driven thousands of residents to emigrate to save their lives, or the lives of their children who are forcibly recruited.
The U.S. acknowledges that it is working on a resolution with European allies to pressure Iran to fully comply with the International Atomic Energy Agency. According to the spokesman for the U.S. Department of State, Ned Price, Iran has not convincingly answered the IAEA's queries.
Just more broadly, we've made clear, and we've spoken to this in recent days, but our very serious concerns that Iran has failed to credibly respond to the IAEA's questions regarding potential undeclared nuclear material and activities in Iran. And we're continuing to work closely with the IAEA, with the Director General, as well as with allies and partners on the Board of Governors, as the agency pursues its investigations into these safeguard issues in Iran. As you alluded to,
Occupied Palestine now, Palestinians marched and chanted anti-Zionist slogans during a rally outside a Ramallah hospital after Zionist troops shot and killed Mohammed Odeh, 17-year-old teenage boy, near the village of Al-Madiyah, west of Ramallah, making him the 4th Palestinian killed in the occupied territory in 2 days. Pakistan's 2-month-old government plans to slash petrol and diesel subsidies for a second time in a week in a bid to control the fiscal deficit and secure an international monetary fund bailout. The IMF stressed the need to end unfunded subsidies, which were costing the cash-strapped country billions per month, in talks with Islamabad that concluded last week. Finance Minister Miftah Ismail said petrol and diesel prices for consumers increased by 70% at the pumps starting on Friday, up 30 rupees per litre. In an email addressed to Tesla executive, Elon Musk said that he has a super bad feeling about recruitment and should be put on hold. The billionaire stated that Tesla must make a pause in recruitment everywhere in the world and reduce its workforce by about 10%. The company, however, was not immediately available for comment. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said at the press release on an annual report on religious freedom around the world that India is seeing an increase in attacks on people in place of worship, and says some Indian officials supported attacks on religious minorities. Let's take a listen.
Beyond these countries, the report documents how religious freedom and the rights of religious minorities are under threat in communities around the world. For example, in India, the world's largest democracy and home to a great diversity of faiths, we've seen rising attacks on people in places of worship.
And finally, in our news, Queen Elizabeth will miss the national service of Thanksgiving at St. Paul's Cathedral in London today after experiencing some discomfort following her brief appearance on the Buckingham Palace balcony on Thursday. The Queen has had trouble moving around in recent months and has pulled out. And with this beautiful footage, let's have a reminder of our top stories. President Joe Biden has delivered an impassioned speech to Congress to act on gun violence. Ukraine's president says 20% of his country is under Russian control, but vows to continue defending Ukraine. El Salvador security forces have arrested more than 36,000 people since Congress granted President Nayib Bukele the power to suspend some civil liberties to pursue powerful street gangs. And finally on our news, you watched Queen Elizabeth missing the national service of Thanksgiving at St. Paul's Cathedral in London today after experiencing some discomfort following her brief appearance on the Buckingham Palace balcony on Thursday. Well, we reached the end of our program. This is Karim Fazakari signing off. Thank you for tuning in. Bye-bye.